All right. It is Saturday, February 17th. We are live together here at Overcome Babylon. Thank you for being here. And one of the main things that I want to talk about today is the fact that, yes, I think we can safely say that the Hebrew New Year, according to the agricultural time clock of the Most High God, the new moon sightings, is going to begin in about 24 days, as you can see on screen here. From today's date to March 11th is 24 days. And the reason for March 11th, if you go look at the projections of the visibility of the moon, it'll be waxing about 1% on the 10th, which will be basically impossible to see with a naked eye. You might need binoculars and telescopes, but that's not how you do it. According to ancient Hebrew, easy practices of the Bible, you just look for the new moon. If you can't see it, then you can't declare a new month. And in this particular case, we can't declare the new year. Most likely on March 10th. It's going to be March 11th, like 99% sure that's going to be the case. With that being said, New Year coming up March 11th in the evening. Remember, Hebrew day is from sundown to sundown. It is a 13-month year this year. Again, I'm going off of the fact that the barley is just not ready, guys. If go to the Rumble channel or YouTube, either one. We last week, literally a week ago, I covered why there is a 13-month calendar in our Bibles. It's quite amazing. If because there's people that'll say, I have no idea why people do 13 months in a year. That's so weird. And yes, it fluctuates. It could be 12 months or 13 months, but a Hebrew year can have 13 months. And so if you go to overcomebabylon.com/5860, which is the year coming up from 2024 to 2025, I've crossed out all those 12-month year projections because it looks like we are indeed going to have a 13th month year this year. Again, I'm like 98, 99% sure this is the 13th month, not the first month right now. And so we are well on our way to a new year. And with that, again, I just want to remind you, today is, this is from insearchofhisancientpath.com, Becca Bitterman's website. She does a great job overlaying the Hebrew days with the Gregorian. And right now we are on the 6th day of the 13th month, my friends. And if for some reason that changes, I'll let you know, but pretty sure this is the 13th month, not the first month of the next year. So with that being said, we have a lot to talk about today, guys. Thank you for being here. I know I wasn't here at all this week. It happens when I'm on the road, okay? I had a lot of traveling. I literally went to three different states. Doing a lot of stuff around here. I mean, I run a farm and a ranch, basically. So there's that. There's other things that I have to take care of on the regular. Honestly, you guys know that I follow a couple of YouTube channels pretty heavily. One of those is Canadian Prepper. I have no idea how that guy gets anything done with his life and publishes a video sometimes twice a day, mostly once a day, with just hours long of news. In a way, I would kind of like to do that to an effect, which I think we've been doing with the Monday, Wednesday, Friday lives. But when I'm busy, it's just impossible, guys. So I appreciate the fact that you guys missed me. And we're back. I mean, I'm going to try my best to keep doing the Monday, Wednesday, Friday lives, but it absolutely is impossible when I'm on the road. Let's take a look at some verses today on the Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom, guys. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm Abraham. We're always going through the most relevant, most critical biblical information, analysis, end times, prophecy, things that are happening right in front of us that God is showing us, those types of things. Proverbs 14:34 is of particular importance. It says, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Now, this verse doesn't make sense to a lot of people. They think they understand it, but they really don't, because most people don't understand what sin is. But if we just flip over to the later part of the book in 1 John, it tells us in 1 John 3:4, whoever commits sin also commits lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness. And what that means is you're breaking God's law, breaking God's instructions from the Torah, which is just Genesis to Deuteronomy, to Joshua, Judges, all the way to Malachi, all the way to the book of Acts. Those are all God's instructions, breathed by the Holy Spirit, penned for us. And so my encouragement to you is, if you are, again, doubting anything that has to do with the feast days, or you don't completely understand the 13th month, why we add a 13th month, an intercalated lunar calendar, and how that works with the Bible, please check out a link down below in the description down below. There's a link to join Kingdom Secrets Academy. That's kingdom-secrets.com. And you can join the academy for free, and you can download stuff. You can go through a lot of step-by-step information that'll help make all this really clearly and help bring you out of not understanding God's constitution, right? Being in a state of without law, lawlessness. That's all it means. And rather than practicing lawlessness, we can together go into a place where we're at least practicing the things that are pleasing in God's sight. Again, a lot of people fail to understand that very important biblical truth. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do here at Overcome Babylon. Thank you guys for being here. We need to talk about the Super Baal. That chapter has not yet closed. We need to close that chapter today. I'm just going to cover some brief concepts, and then we're going to jump over into, honestly, what I believe is going to be some really important considerations going into what is the new year, Hebrew New Year. And even though the Bible says nothing about celebrating Jewish Purim, that's I'm going to show you how there are all these dates I'm showing you on screen here have historical military precedent for activity and all kinds of instability. So we're going to look at these things together. Let's wrap up what we talked about last week about the Super Baal. Okay, look, it's funny, people that don't understand what we do here in this channel. There was a lot of ignorant backlash to this video. Again, I said many times, hey, I could be wrong about this, but there's a lot of conditioning, there's a lot of pre-programming going into this event. And even though The Dark Knight Rises put out those videos, or not videos, but put out that message of a suitcase nuclear weapon, even though the Sum of All Fears had a vending machine nuclear device inside of a stadium, both of those were football stadiums, etc., etc., etc. It didn't work out that way. I still believe that this is the last Super Bowl that will ever be played, just because of what I see on the horizon. I could be wrong about that too, but I really do think that was the last Super Bowl. But did you guys catch the news related to this Super Bowl? A lot of suspicious activity going on. First of all, Mayorkas was actually impeached. Guys, this is the first time this has happened since let me see. I think there's a quote in here. I want to say Mayorkas, if you don't know who he is, I'll tell you in a second. But this is the first time something like this has happened in a very long time. He was voted to be impeached since the 1870s. There it is. It's like, it's kind of hidden between those images. This is the first time that a cabinet official has been impeached since the 1870s. So to say this is big news is an understatement. This is massive news. This doesn't happen, okay? This is very odd. That's why I posted inside the Telegram. Again, link down below to join the Telegram. This is extremely odd. Exactly a week after a failed attempt, the House has impeached Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, under whose tenure more than 10 million illegal immigrants have entered the United States, doubling the existing population of migrants. That is a very, very watered-down, friendly estimate. Guys, I've heard things pushing 64 million. There's evidence to support 50, 60 million. 10 million is just the official narrative that sounds cozy, and that's what the media has rolled with, zero hedge included, which is where I'm getting this article from. In case you didn't know, Mayorkas was directly involved with Super Bowl security. So if you don't think, it's just very suspicious, guys. He was fired. He was impeached, right? Same thing, basically. Impeached a couple of days after the Super Bowl. I mean, it's just strange timing, okay? It's a strange case of timing. That's all. Okay. We're going to see a little bit more coincidental type of things. In case you didn't know, by the way, there were 385. I read that backwards. 385 DHS agents for the Super Bowl security. And even though nothing happened in the Super Bowl itself, I do find it very suspicious that Mayorkas was impeached. Perhaps maybe there was a bigger plan, or maybe something went wrong. We don't know. The timing is highly suspicious. I'm telling you. But obviously, you guys know because I posted in the Telegram. This is from NFL.com. Obviously, CNN and others were reporting it as it was unfolding, but there was a mass shooting at a Chiefs Super Bowl parade after they had won the game. This was in Kansas City. You had 2 juveniles being charged with the crimes connected to a shooting. You have over 22 people injured. I forget how many were killed. Looks like mother of 2 was killed. 22 people were injured. I thought there was at least one more person killed, but definitely 22 people were injured by gunfire Wednesday. So just a few days after the Super Bowl, so you had that mass shooting. One thing I forgot to also mention is that there was a Lakewood church shooting that happened. This is Joel Osteen, mega church, Joel Osteen's church, Lakewood Church. And there was another shooting there that happened exactly on February 11th. So that was Super Bowl day. I thought that was kind of strange timing. The woman was, hopped up on all kinds of, drugs, kind of a druggy woman with schizophrenia. And she basically a couple people ended up killed. And so that happened. I'm not going to get into that because I think the bigger piece of news that honestly, I'm talking about the big media outlets, the so-called alternative media outlets did not cover this. The fact that a Nigerian banking CEO is among 6 people killed when a helicopter traveling from California to Nevada crashes in the Mojave Desert. This was exactly on Super Bowl weekend. Okay, the more you dig into this one, the more you realize this is a problem. Okay, I mean the timing is absolutely ridiculous. So even though I was quote unquote wrong about how big it was going to be of an event, there was a lot of shootings around this, and if I only watched it on Twitter, on X. I do not care to watch this stuff, but I did see Usher standing in a ring of fire worshiping the solar eclipse on stage during the halftime performance. I just saw a little clip of it and I was like, yep, they're worshiping the solar eclipse. That's what the prophets of Baal do. Again, in the book of Kings, Elijah was commanded to kill the prophets of Baal. They're called prophets of Baal because they forecast and they actually tell you their plans in public settings. And they're like prophets. They tell you future events, even though they're demons and devils and possessed with all kinds of unclean spirits. Legions of unclean spirits are in these people, but they're prophets of Baal. And I cannot help but notice, this is from the Daily Mail, of course, that there's a particular CEO by the name of Dr. Herbert Wigwe, 57 years old, who was the co-founder of Nigeria's largest bank, Access Bank, who died in a horror helicopter crash Friday night. So Friday going into the Super Bowl weekend. This didn't get any coverage. But do you realize that, billions of under asset management? This is a CEO of the biggest bank, one of the biggest banks. No, it's actually saying that it is the largest bank, Access Bank. This article is. He was killed in a helicopter crash going to the Super Bowl. He was in Palm Springs, California, got on a helicopter to go over to Las Vegas. And, well, the official narrative is that it was a dark, icy, cold, windy night. And the helicopter crash lit on fire, and it's going to take him 2 years to investigate all the evidence. Something doesn't smell right with this one, guys. Shock, grief, and questions as Herbert Wigwe, one of Nigeria's greatest bankers, die in U.S. helicopter crash. This is from a LinkedIn article. And it says that, Nigeria's largest bank by assets died in a helicopter crash. He was one of 4 passengers that included his wife, son, and former group chairman of the NGX Abimbola Ogunbanjo. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board has commenced investigations into the cause of the crash. It says the investigation is a long process, but hope to submit an interim report in 2 weeks, while the final report may take up to 24 months. Yeah, something's not right with this one, guys. The more you look into it, okay, I'm gonna share this with you. You can I don't want to spend too much time on this, but one thing that I kind of have found as a common theme, just with a little bit of chatter, again, the so-called alternative media is not covering this. The big guys, none of them are covering it. Okay, what I'm seeing is that this particular man was opposed to the Western CBDC system. and he was trying to implement a different type of cryptocurrency system it was in opposition to Western CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. That's the word on the street. Again, I'm probably not going to investigate this one any further. I just wanted to bring it up to you that this did in fact coincide with the Super Bowl pagan Baal satanic ritual. And sadly, rest in peace, my friends. This is not good for these particular people. They didn't play ball with the West, with the banking system. That's what I'm seeing. If I read in between the lines and look at all the evidence, just what we have on the table right now, that's what I'm seeing. And all I can tell you is, yeah, death usually accompanies these types of black sun worship events of the Illuminati and the occult. I'm just telling you, that's the way these things work, okay? And so it was no surprise to me that big stuff happened. What do you think is going to happen with all the assets under management of Access Bank now that the CEO has basically been Omar Gaddafi? If you don't know about Muammar Gaddafi, he was trying to actually increase the wealth, education, and access to resources of Northern Africa. Well, the U.S. took him out too. Under Hillary Clinton and Obama, that regime. And, one thing about this particular man, Wigway, is that they were saying he was basically launching the Harvard of Africa, called Wigway University. And so they just, they got rid of him. They disposed of him, guys. Sadly, this has been like the history of Africa. Whenever there's anybody who actually has somewhat of a benevolent cause, or at least the appearance of good, like we never really know people's true intentions till they, I don't know. Eventually all things come to light. But what I'm saying is Omar Gaddafi was actually wanted to unite Africa under a gold-backed currency. It looks like Wigway was doing something kind of similar with education and actually boosting Nigeria, which is honestly, it's one of the biggest economies in Africa. I've talked about that on the podcast before. And so that coincided with Super Baal. It coincides with Mayorkas being impeached. It coincides with the Lakewood shooting. There's a lot of, it was a bloody, bloody time in history. It really was, guys. Really was. So when I say, hey, here are some potential flashpoints going in the future, even though it may not turn out the way that I say, what's crazy is it's kind of like September 22nd, 2023. People were all over me saying, oh, how dare you even say anything about that day? Oh my gosh, you're so false. Oh. And if people would just slow down, right? Hopefully it's not you, but if people would just slow down and give it a buffer, give it a few days before, you got the Nigerian banker, top CEO dead. Give it a few days after, well, you got a mass shooting in Kansas City. Give it a little buffer and you'll see that, wow, yeah, he wasn't wrong. He just, in this case, I didn't accurately forecast exactly what was going to happen, which I think is really, really difficult to do. But what I will say is that I think the message is really clear at this point. You got to stay away from mass gatherings, whether it's Lakewood Church or Kansas City parades. They're planning on having more of those parades, by the way. And you got to avoid mass gatherings from this point on. Okay. Again, I've already shown you this before. Let me just show you on screen one more time. We have a lunar eclipse on March 25th. This is where it's going to be visible right here, highly visible over the Western United States. Like that's the midpoint that I'm seeing here. But it's visible over the entire United States. And then, of course, we have the solar eclipse 2 weeks later, April 8th, United States one more time, but also Mexico up into Canada, Nova Scotia. Okay, so all these regions, again, I've talked about this many times, but the radiation, it plays with people's minds. The radiation, those who are susceptible to strange behavior, right? A mass shooting at a church, in this case, in Lakewood Church, right? People who are susceptible, who are not mentally stable, who are demon possessed, who have unclean spirits, who are crazy, will do crazy things because of the radiation of these events, because of how these events work. They trigger almost like mass psychosis events sometimes. It's really strange. It's an omen from God. I mean, they're his signs. He created the heavens and the earth. He created the sun, moon, and stars also. Okay. They're God's signs. It's just that they have consequences and they have certain activities associated with them during times of judgment, which we are a nation under judgment. The United States and the West are nations under judgment. And so before we really go into this further, before we look at Ramadan, New Year, Jewish Purim, Passover, 7th day, before we look at all these things together, Really one of the first, before we even get to March 10th, which is really where everything kind of kicks off with Ramadan as far as what we need to be paying attention to. One thing going into late February, it has to do with the International Court of Justice. Okay, the ICJ. If you recall, they have various hearings on international affairs. It's part of the UN, right? Power structure. And South Africa submitted allegations of genocide between what Israel's doing and Palestine and Gaza. And basically, this is just one of the latest reports. Basically, after South Africa's petition to basically hold Israel accountable for genocide accusations or allegations, um, the court actually ruled obviously in South Africa's favor, and they're giving. Let me show you here on screen. It's a little bit easier to see. They're giving Israel about a month to comply with court orders of proving that they are doing whatever they can to prevent genocide, to actually, provide humanitarian aid and access to Gaza and so forth, and the Palestinian people. And so in late February, towards the end of this current month, Israel will file with the court a statement of concrete actions it has taken in response to the court's decision. So, among many flashpoints, I say all that to say this. Among many flashpoints is going into late February, Israel's failure to provide convincing evidence could be a flashpoint in and of itself, or it could be justification for future flashpoints. Because, as you know, when South Africa approached the court, the ICJ, Israel hadn't been bombing Rafah yet. Like, that's new. Now, all of a sudden, Israel's bombing Rafah over there on the Egyptian border, right? And now Egypt's getting pissed. Egypt's looking for, they're getting ready to take action, it looks like. I mean, we don't know yet. But I'm just saying, going into late February, it's going to kind of set the narrative. It's going to set the tone that Israel, again, the sins are reaching to heaven, right? That's what we read in the book of Revelation. We're going to start to see this narrative build that the sins of Mystery Babylon have reached to heaven, and all the world, it's all naked for the world to see, and everybody is going to turn on her. Even recently, the Biden administration is kind of like turning their back a little bit on Israel as well. And so it says in Revelation, the whole world is going to turn on Mystery Babylon and the system, on that power structure that's headquartered in Jerusalem, which is the great city of Mystery Babylon. And so that's the narrative building up into late February, when Israel, in my opinion, is going to miserably fail to provide any evidence for humanitarian aid, for the fact that they are not committing genocide. I think they're going to fail. It's like someone just falling flat on their face on the sidewalk. It's not looking good for them. So coming into late February, it's going to set the tone for Ramadan, which is really the next piece of news on my radar, or really one of the biggest events on my radar going forward. In case you didn't know, Ramadan is the 9th month in the Islamic calendar. This year, it's going to start the Sunday, the evening. So an Islamic day in their calendar is just like the Hebrew or the Bible. It's from evening to evening, right? That's a day. So they got that right. That's good. From Sunday, March 10th, it's going to last 30 days, ending at sundown on Monday, April 8th. Okay. So during this period, can you imagine? The Islamic world, it's one of the holiest, if not the holiest month on the Islamic calendar. We're going to dive into this a little bit more, but you also have the pilgrimage to Mecca that takes place during this time. If you're not familiar with Mecca, it's located in Saudi Arabia, third most populated city. It's kind of right there, okay, along the coast here. You can kind of see that, well, if you look into it, which we're going to look at it a little bit more granular detail today. This is one of the 5 pillars of Islam that everyone must travel to Mecca to make the pilgrimage. Okay? One of the pillars, there's 5 duties incumbent on every Muslim. This is from Britannica.com. And everyone must basically do the prayers in the prescribed manner 5 times each day. There's what's called the zakat, the alms tax levied to benefit the poor and the needy, the Psalm, fasting during the month of Ramadan, and of course, the Hajj. Hopefully, I'm saying that right. Okay. Forgive me if I'm not, because I don't really speak Arabic that well. All I know how to say is shukran. The Hajj, the major pilgrimage to Mecca, if financial and physical conditions permit. This is similar to what we do in God's calendar and with the Torah, with where God commands all men to appear in Jerusalem 3 times a year as a perpetual statute during Unleavened Bread Day 1, Feast of Pentecost, and then the first day of Sukkot. We are also commanded to do pilgrimages. With the Islamic world, they do their pilgrimage to Mecca according to the teachings of Muhammad. And so if you look into the Hajj, this is the focus, one of the focuses of Ramadan, which is that whole month. Um Again, every adult Muslim must make this at least once in their lifetime. Pretty big, because when you start looking into Ramadan and you start looking into events that have occurred in and around Ramadan, you start to see a pattern emerge. You start to see a pattern of historically periods of war and battles that have been fought by Muslims during Ramadan, during this month, okay? But, one thing I kind of want to talk about, because I found it very interesting. Hopefully you find it interesting like I do too. Um, the cube. What's going on with this cube? It's called the Kaaba, I believe is how you say it. The Kaaba. The cube is very interesting. It's literally, that's like, if it were translated literally, I believe that's what it's saying. It's the cube. And let me just show you what that looks like. I mean, they literally dance around it. Not dance, not dance. They walk around it and they literally bow down to it, guys. Let me fast forward here. You can literally see that they bow down to the cube. And I want to show you again, I don't know the official Quran and the oral Quran teachings of why they are doing this. I don't know their narrative on it, but I can tell you where the symbolism comes from. Is that cool? If we just jump straight to the crux of the matter here, I want to show you where who inspired this and why it's a black cube. I think you're going to be very, very enlightened by this to understand this phenomenon much better. I guess I don't have it here, but they eventually they do bow down and pray towards it. Obviously, this is what's meant by praying towards Mecca, which is also part of Islamic rituals, to pray towards Mecca. Anyways, I thought I'd show you that on screen so you know I'm not exaggerating. What I found very interesting about the cube, the black cube, is when you take a little look closer at, it's funny. There's like it's a universal language of the occult, whether it's Freemasonry and the various aspects of Freemasonry in the West, or Talmudic Zionism, Judaism in the Middle East, obviously headquartered in Jerusalem, or the different Eastern mystic religions. They all have some very interesting and fascinating things in common, and one of them has to do with this star that I have on screen. So what I'm showing you on screen here is the star of Saturn, which I've talked about many times, the star of Rephaim. You can see the hexagon, right? It's a hexagonal shape on there. And this is what, Jews use as their national symbol, the Zionists use. What's fascinating, if you haven't considered this, by the way, let me just tell it straight, because I've talked about this before, but let me just say it again because it's worth saying again. The Bible tells us that God made the heavens. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. But it doesn't say that in the beginning God created the heavens and many earths, plural. It doesn't say that he created many earths. So I know what they've told you, okay? They told me the same thing. In college, university, higher education, Saturn is a planet. Guys, he created one earth. One earth, not multiple haaretz. He created haaretz. Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. He created just one earth. Saturn is just a star. And from the satellite imagery of NASA, which is what I'm showing you on screen, again, I've said this before, it's NASA. It's highly suspicious. They have a very, very well-funded Photoshop department, if you know what I'm saying. But what it's interesting about their Photoshop version of Saturn is that it has a hexagon or hexagonal type of shape on the top of it. And it also has, well, if you look deeper in the middle of it, it's a cube. Again, research this. Research the concept of a cube if you really want to dig deep into it. You can see it if I zoom in enough. And this image even tells you, yeah, the cube is something that originates from Kabbalah, mystical practices of Solomon. It's the cube. You can also overlay it inside of the star of Raphaim or the star of Saturn, which is known as the Star of David, which is totally false, total nonsense. It's not the Star of David. This is just an occultic symbol. That's a universal symbol used in many religions because they're all Nimrodic and Babylonian religions. All of them originate with Nimrod, though. But basically, this is a what the black cube is. I'm not going to spend too much more time on it. It's paying a homage to Saturn, which, as we know, is that star that has fallen, which is Satan. Different religions have many different names for this. The Romans called it Saturnalia, and they would do Saturnalia worship or Saturn worship or Satan worship around winter solstice every single year. Saturnalia. The Jews use it on their star, and they call it the Star of David, and they say, "Oh, it's so amazing," but it's the Star of Satan. It's the Star of Saturn. The Islamic world takes the cube that is inside of the star of Saturn, and it also is interestingly and ironically in the Star of David, they call it the Zionist star. It's right in the center. They take the cube and they pray around it, and they pray facing toward the cube in Mecca. And so all I'm saying is the thing about mysticism and paganism is the digger you deep, you'll find that all religions have the same fundamental paganism in common. They all worship something else other than the creator. They all worship God in a way that he has not prescribed for his people to worship him. Whether it's that star of Saturn that the Jews have, or the cube of Mecca, the Kaaba that the Muslims have, etc., etc. It's all, or Saturnalia of the Romans, it's all falsehood. Okay, it's lawlessness. Point blank. So, battles fought during Ramadan by Muslims. This is a pretty big list. I can't go through all of them. It starts in 624 with the Battle of Badr. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Badr. The Battle of the Ditch, Battle of Tabuk, Conquest of Rhodes. Muslims led by Tariq bin Ziyad invaded Spain. Okay, so you have all these different battles. I'm not going to go through all of them. One of them that's of most importance that we're going to talk about is the Ramadan War, also known as the Yom Kippur War. We're going to talk about that. I will also talk about this very first one called the Battle of Badr, because Muhammad was directly involved with this one, and he kind of set the precedent for Ramadan being a month where, you know, maybe these sorts of duties should be carried out. He laid that sort of cultural and religious standard, if that makes sense. He kind of laid that foundation. So the Battle of Badr took place in March 624 AD or CE, Common Era, after Anno Domini, Year of Our Lord, in the Arabia town of Badr, between Islamic prophet Muhammad-led Muslim army and a relief column of the Meccan Quraysh tribe. And so basically there was a conflict here that happened. You can read more about this. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But the Yom Kippur War is the one that I kind of want to spend some time on, because a lot of people were talking about the Yom Kippur War because of what happened with October 7th. If you recall, October 7th, 2023, if you do the math, basically, you know, almost exactly the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. And so, but this war, you may have not known this. I didn't know this until I started looking into it more. It's also called the Ramadan War. And the first question that you probably have is, how is this called the Ramadan War when it took place in October? When Ramadan, I thought that was you know, March. Like that's what I have on screen too. If you remember what I had on screen, Ramadan begins in March. Why is the Yom Kippur War called Ramadan or the Ramadan War? And this was quite a mystery. I had to look into this. It has to do with the Islamic calendar. Okay, the average duration of a tropical year is 365 days. You guys know this. You know that's kind of like how the Gregorian and Julian calendars are set up. Um, So the average lunar year, which is 12 new moons, is about 10.875 days shorter than the average solar year, causing the months of the Arabic or Islamic calendar to advance about 11 days earlier each year relative to the equinoxes. So let me just read to you a little note that I made earlier because I kind of summarized this a little bit better. So whereas the Hebrew calendar inserts, and I'm talking about the Hebrew calendar, I'm talking about the Torah calendar, the Bible calendar, Elohim's calendar. Again, many people will disagree with just what I'm about to say about this, right? Because no, it's the Enoch calendar. No, it's the Zadok calendar. We got to go to the Dead Sea Scrolls of the Essene caves and dig up some mystical artifacts to determine God's calendar. We don't do that here. I don't play footsie with the demonic, mystical texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The biblical Masoretic Hebrew text. That's all I go off of, not the Septuagint, nothing else. The biblical Masoretic Hebrew text. I'm sorry if you've been around the channel, I know I'm belaboring the point, but the biblical Masoretic Hebrew text tells us that from new moon to new moon is a month, etc., etc. So the Hebrew calendar inserts an extra intercalary month at regular intervals in order to adjust the year for the presence of Abib barley. And the Abib barley has to be on time in order to make the required first fruits offering for Wave Sheaf Day. You guys know this. This is what I've been talking about. In fact, let me just bring it up one more time. If you missed it, this is the thumbnail you want to look for. If I can find it here, this is the thumbnail you want to look for. Make sure you go check out that episode of the podcast. Here's why the Islamic calendar is different. The Islamic calendar makes no such accommodation for a 13th month or an intercalation. Perhaps because its basis is only religious, not agricultural. So basically, the Islamic calendar is like another Hebrew roots calendar, like the Enoch or Zadok or equinox calendars, all these other calendars, right, that are extra biblical nonsense, foolishness. The Islamic calendar is basically like a Hebrew roots calendar that is solely religious and doesn't really care about agriculture. Whereas the Bible's calendar tells us you must have Abib barley to declare the first month of Abib to begin the year. This is the fundamental difference between what the Bible teaches and what every religion, including all those Hebrew roots offshoots, God bless them. Some of them are trying, but man, they're off base because they just don't look at the fact that we need to beat barley at a very specific time for Wave Sheaf Day. So the Islamic calendar is very similar to a lot of Hebrew roots calendars that are out there, actually. And so basically, because of that, they follow a standardized 12 month year, 12 months in a year, 12 months. And so there's drift. There's calendrical drift with the Gregorian to the Islamic. That's why in 1973, the Yom Kippur War was also called the Ramadan War, because back in those days, Ramadan was celebrated in October, but this year it's going to be in March. Okay. And if you didn't know, the Islamic calendar actually began in the common year, or 622 AD CE, in the month of Muharram, where Muhammad and his followers migrated from Mecca, where they were persecuted, to Medina, where they established the first Muslim community. The migration is known as the Hijra, which we talked about, which is also the name of the Islamic calendar. The new year is called Al-Hijri or Al-Hijra or Muharram 1. The different spellings reflect different transliterations from the Arabic. So again, my friends, follow the Hebrew calendar. Don't follow all these Hebrew roots calendars. In my opinion, the Islamic calendar is no different than all those Hebrew roots calendars. Again, let me just summarize this real quick because it is a very important point. You look at Ezekiel chapter 1. You go from Ezekiel chapter 1 to Ezekiel chapter 8. There is a timeline given to us of about 437 days. That's not the entire time period within these two chapters, but we're given so many days, 437, that to get from Ezekiel chapter 1 to Ezekiel chapter 8, there's no other way you can possibly look at this time period except for through the lens of a 13th month year, intercalated year, to adjust for the barley offering. That is a beautiful thing. No other calendar can do that. Again, we know that Ezekiel, a faithful prophet of Yah, kept the holy things holy, and he actually, within the pages of his writings, tells us there is a 13th month in the year, depending on the readiness of the barley. So hopefully that is just a little refresher on that. But that is why the Yom Kippur War is also called the Ramadan War, okay? Ramadan War. And so we know what happened, right? We have Egypt and Syria, I believe, were the main aggressors. Yep, the Arab states led by Egypt and Syria. And what's interesting is we're kind of seeing a repeat of this happening right now on the world stage. Now that Israel has basically started bombing Rafah and causing more civilian casualties over in Rafah, right there next to Egypt, now Egypt is getting a little bit more invested into this conflict. Whereas before, they were kind of on the sidelines. Syria is getting bombed all the time by Israel and the West. And so we might see a repeat of this come this year during Ramadan, where Egypt and Syria, along with a coalition, kick it up a notch. They might kick it up a notch. There might be more troop movements, more bombing campaigns on Israel itself. There might be, there might be some sort of preemptive strikes on key infrastructure like Patriot missile defense systems. We don't know. But that's kind of why I'm showing you this. Hey, watch out. The Yom Kippur War was also on Ramadan. And so coming from March 10th to April 9th, this is a pretty volatile period of time. Muhammad had set the precedent long ago. This is a time to engage in war if you have to. Even though they're fasting, even though the Arab countries will be fasting, that's never stopped them in the past. And in fact, it might actually fuel and unify them in a way that it might actually be even more of a flashpoint than it normally would be on any other month of the year. So Ramadan is big. I just want to point that out. Now, really, the next thing I want to talk about is the fact that, yes, the new year is coming up on March 11th. I'm like 98% sure we're just not going to have barley in the next, 6-7 days? Yeah, no. It'd be about 8 days. Yeah, we're not going to have barley by the time. Anyway, I forget when Wave Sheaf Day would be if it were this month, but we're not going to have barley in time. I don't see it happening, but I could be wrong. But for now, New Year, March 11th. Okay. The New Year is a time when there usually has been, as far as I've been following this for the past several years, there can be some instability in some things. I'll talk more about the actual biblical Hebrew calendar in a moment when we start talking about the seventh day. When we talk about the seventh day, I think it's going to be a big eye-opener. Let's just talk about Jewish Purim for a second. Again, this is something that's not commanded. Let me repeat again, not commanded in the scriptures, so I don't do it. If it's not commanded, I'm too busy with life as it is. I don't have time for extra holidays. I just don't, okay? I'm a busy guy. I only make time for God's holidays, that's it. So Purim, it has a good message behind it. It's about Esther, right? They read the whole book of Esther during Purim. The Jews do. They added a bunch of laws to it. They're like, this is what the Talmud says. You have to do this. And it's just a bunch of man-made traditions. Again, that's not to say that Purim, as they pronounce it, is evil. Purim is not evil in and of itself, but if it's the religion and boasting and the pride that comes with religious stuff, then yeah, that's wrong. But if you want to celebrate Purim, fine. Read the book of Esther. That's cool. But I personally will not. And so this year, it's going to be, again, it's a 2-day event. I forgot about that. It begins at sundown, Saturday, March 23rd, concludes at nightfall, March 24th. So here's some things that have happened in Purim in the past. This is again from Chabad. Is that showing up on screen? Yes, it is. Just from Chabad, they say, here's some things you should know. It's the jolliest day of the year. It's all about joy and festivity. In this list of 15 things that Chabad says that we should know about Purim, one of them is that Joseph Stalin's health was actually, it started to decline, they say, beginning on Purim of 1953. In the early 1950s, Joseph Stalin, the ruthless butcher of millions of innocent people, which is true, Oh man, yeah, big time. Communism has killed way more people than any other device in history, modern history. And he had bloody plans for dealing with the Jewish problem in the USSR. Just as things were reaching a crisis point in 1953, he suddenly fell ill and died. His illness began on, you guessed it, Purim. Well, that's interesting. And I thought it would be worth noting with you that that did in fact happen. One thing that I want to also point out to you is the fact that, and this is from the Jerusalem Post. It's an article of someone's firsthand recollection of the Gulf War, and they basically say here that there's a certain rabbi named Lubavitcher Rebbe, uh, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Okay, I don't know. Is that the same person? It looks like it is. Basically, this rabbi had predicted the Gulf War would conclude on Purim, February 28th, 1991. When that came to pass, it only added further fuel to the burst of sheer joy that engulfed the nation. So basically, if you don't remember the Gulf War, um, I'll bring you up to speed a little bit. But basically, there was somebody named Saddam Hussein. He had chemical weapons. He was at large. So, the UN got together with the US leading a UN coalition of troops, and they took out Saddam Hussein, that evil man with the chemical weapons. Okay, that's Gulf War in a nutshell. But this is known as Purim Saddam because, again, this is the Purim where it was all joy and festivities that the Scud missiles of Saddam Hussein and all of the chemical weapons and everything, he was taken out. He was defeated. Okay. And it was Purim when that happened. I forget. There's a reason why I had this particular article open. Um, Let me see here. Suddenly, the long-awaited war was underway. Yeah, the war actually ended on Purim. And yeah, this is what I wanted to cover. Newsweek, and March 11th, 1991, Newsweek published a cover story on the war and called the Persian Gulf War a triumph of almost biblical proportions. Now, that's a little it's all very suspicious. You guys know that I always say question everything, right? Whether it's Newsweek, New York Times. Did you know that Saddam Hussein was helped by the CIA? This is foreignpolicy.com. Saddam Hussein, where did he come from? The more you look into this, which I'm not going to take tremendous time to do today, you find out that yes, the CIA actually helped Saddam to gas Iran. So he was armed and funded by the CIA, by the US. The US knew Hussein was launching some of the worst chemical attacks in history and still gave him a hand because that's what empires do. They create bad actors for their own purposes, and there's just enough mutual agreement between the CIA and bad actors to reach common goals. And then when maybe a CIA asset like Saddam Hussein gets a little out of control or maybe beyond their reach, then they take him out. And so I know I'm summarizing a lot of history here, but you just have to bear with me that this whole narrative of Saddam being taken out and it was biblical proportions and so amazing and Purim, it's just a bunch of narrative and controlled opposition. I mean, the CIA installed this guy, gave him weapons, and even this is from Wikipedia. It's like common knowledge that Saddam was in frequent contact with US officials and intelligence agents when he was in Cairo, when he was being, fleeing different areas. He was an asset through and through of the United States military industrial complex. To say that a certain conflict ended a certain way, it sounds very manufactured to me. This sounds like a very manufactured narrative because it's not a biblical holiday. This only boosts the Zionist state's perceptions around the world of how powerful they are and all these types of things. And that's kind of the narratives we've been fed from the US propaganda point of view to further prop up this state, give them endless supply, money, aid, and weapons. And so I don't know. That's just my viewpoint on these things. It's very suspicious that the media would be so pro Israel and pro Zionist. Of course, I've made my case on these things many times before. There's a reason why they're very pro-Israel and pro-Zionist. I'll leave it at that because of cancel culture. All right. COVID-19 in the middle of the week. You guys know that some pretty big stuff happened in 2020. And it looks like we might actually be seeing something similar this time around as well. So we've talked about Ramadan. We talked about the New Year a little bit. Talked about Jewish Purim and how that has been a flashpoint in the past, whether for victory or whatever you want to call it. But there was war or outcomes of war that happened during Purim. So it's something to pay attention to. And God also says that I will turn your feasts into mourning. He says that many times in the prophets. I don't have any of those scriptures pulled up, but perhaps this might be the Purim that is not going to be full of joy. That has yet to be seen. We don't know. But the next thing I have on the list is Passover. You guys know that Passover of 2020 was really big. Passover 2020, we had basically the declaration of the WHO saying there's a worldwide pandemic. It happened March 11th, which was a Wednesday. And that affected the whole world. It was that is biblical. That is of biblical proportion, 100%. The fact that the pandemic was declared in 2020 in the middle of the week. And so basically any Passover is always significant in my eyes just because that was so memorable. It's so fresh. It's so big in my mind still. It's so recent still. I've told you about what the media has labeled disease X. You remember we did a whole live on that about a month ago? I told you there's something called disease X. They're talking about it. I don't know. Is this going to be a launch date for that? I don't know. You tell me. All I can tell you, watch out for Passover. Watch out more specifically, I would say, watch out for the 7th day of Unleavened Bread. So here's where, okay, I'm going to direct your attention to Overcome Babylon 5859. If you go to the website, again, you just go to the biblical calendar section, and you can look at the different years. And I have some commentary on here of what happened during the current Hebrew year we're actually in right now, which isn't over yet. Because the spring feasts of last year, if you recall, there was some pretty big stuff that happened. Let me scroll down to the geopolitical events. So this is what happened this year, but last spring feasts, if that makes sense. The first day after the High Holy Day of Unleavened Bread, the U.S. financial market started crashing on Thursday, March 9th, with Silicon Valley Bank and Silvergate Bank both taking huge hits and now causing a domino effect of mass sell-offs, bank runs, and panicking. Things got really bad, and then suddenly they sort of cooled off the next week. There was a fake upward bounce in the markets with various stocks and even cryptocurrency recovering by 10% or more in value. People began foolishly saying that the bank runs and sell-offs were no big deal. However, the day after the 7th day of Unleavened Bread, which is a Sabbath, okay, no work, make sure you rest up on 7th day of Unleavened Bread, the market started crashing again. The bank run situation started escalating again on this day of March 15th. And so banking failures started becoming more systemic. One of my favorite analysts was saying, I believe it was Peter Schiff. Yeah, Peter Schiff was saying the 2023 financial crisis had now begun. Again, go check out some of the info I have in here. Since then, there has been war, there has been money printing, and there have been things to avert the crisis. But I can't help but point your attention to the coincidence that might occur here should there be more banking failures and banking crises moving into the spring feast this year, this new year. So watch out for the spring feast coming up. For me, I don't even know how the banking and financial system is still afloat because I've studied Austrian economics enough to understand how the Weimar Republic fell, right before Hitler. I know enough to understand that this is unsustainable, and it's almost defying every single rule of logic and law. And I've even heard that artificial intelligence is currently propping up the stock market in certain ways. And so it's just about as artificial as it can get. Okay, so you guys know that on God's calendar we start the new year with a new moon. Okay, 14 days later you have Passover. Then you have the first day of Unleavened Bread. You have 7 days of Unleavened Bread. Then there's the 7th day, which is a solemn assembly and a feast day, a holy day, and a rest day. And The reason why I think this is one of the biggest days on the table here is because you look at what happened in very recent history on October 7th. That was 7 days before the solar eclipse of October 14th, okay? October 7th, 14 days, 7 days later, October 14th, boom. So, is something going to happen 7 days before April 8th, which just so happens to be the 7th day of unleavened bread? Do you see what I'm saying? Is something going to happen 7 days before April 8th that has to do with war, surprise attacks? I don't know, but I will mention it to you as a potential flashpoint. Heck yeah, we're in a very unstable time right now. So keep an eye out for 7 days before the eclipse. If history repeats like clockwork, which it doesn't necessarily do, in fact, it doesn't really, but if it does repeat exactly like it did in 2023, you're looking at 7 days before April 8th is another massive event taking place, okay? Now, seriously, guys, listen, I've been kind of ignoring the comment section. I appreciate you guys. Um, Please throw some questions and comments and stuff like that in a moment. Because if you had anything important, like a question for me or something like that, I missed it at this point because I've been really focused. It's obviously I haven't been live at all this past week. There's so much that I wanted to cover and I did not have a chance. I'm basically playing catch up with you guys right now. And one of the things that I wanted to point out to you is the fact that the Cold War narrative is repeating once again, but in an inverse fashion. Okay. What do I mean by inverse fashion? The Cold War, if you remember, it really started as soon as World War II ended. The Cold War became the new crisis between Joseph Stalin and the West, right? As soon as World War II ended, you had a new crisis to keep people afraid, scared, locked down in their homes, right? Constantly fearing something. We always got to be afraid of something. George Orwell wrote about this in his book, 1984, that the empire has always got to be at war to control different narratives and control different outcomes, right? And always keep the people in a state of fear and unification around common enemies or perceived common enemies. That's George Orwell, 1984, man. We are living through it. And so the Cold War has now started again. Instead of back in the day, the Cold War was a conflict between two opposing ideologies. You had on one side capitalism, and the other side you had communism. Look, I understand. I'm giving you the mainstream textbook point of view, okay? I'm giving you the mainstream point of view. And it was a clash between individualism and collectivism. Collectivism on the Soviet Union side and individualism on the Western side, right? And so what Russia in those days attempted to do, let me read to you this list. I just have a list here. This is from it's textbook history, okay? Encyclopedia, basically. Let me read to you what Russia was attempting to do during the Cold War, and I think you're going to see some parallels to what's going on right now. Number one, surround themselves with satellite nations to be exploited for economic and military gain. Number two, gain access to and build bases upon warm water highways of commerce. Number three, carry on the old Russian policy of geographical expansion. And most importantly of all, extend the ideologies of communism throughout the rest of the world. This is the mainstream point of view of what Russia was trying to attempt to achieve during the days of the Cold War, right? You had the Cuban Missile Crisis where they're arming the Cubans, et cetera, et cetera. What's really fascinating to me is, again, I'm seeing a repetition of history, but in an inverse way. Because why did the Cold War eventually end? The Cold War eventually ended because the narrative goes something like this. Mikhail Gorbachev's Russia couldn't keep up. The Soviet Union couldn't keep up with Western military might, technological advancement, and they started to get intimidated by laser-based weapon systems that Ronald Reagan had developed to deter preemptive nuclear strikes. And so the US had become a dominant military force that the Russians, the Soviet Union, couldn't deal with toe to toe. So they had to capitulate. They restructured under the CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States. This is the official narrative. But let me read to you the official narrative of why the Soviet Union collapsed and tell me it doesn't sound like America right now. Number one, the inefficient system of communism itself hindered progress because it gave the people little incentive to work hard or improve their skills. Number two, the communists spent so much time and money building weapons that they could not provide basic food, shelter, and clothing for their people. Although powerful members of the Communist Party enjoyed a high standard of living. Number three, the communists also gave vast amounts of aid to terrorist groups around the world, creating severe financial problems within the Soviet Union. Thus, the evil empire, as Ronald Reagan called it, began to collapse. And then you look at the fact that in these days, Russia is pro-family, basically literally paying people to have kids through amazing tax incentives. They're pro-organic farming. They are against the alphabet soup of gender ideologies. They are against the whole woke culture of the West that's destroying absolutely every fabric of moral society. They are actually, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. You can disagree with me if you want. But Russia, at least on the surface, is really the last bastion of Christianity left in the world today on a national level. It's the last bastion of Christianity on the world stage today. The West is in a total state of lawlessness. They've lost their work ethic. They've lost everything that I look at all these church organizations, okay? The Vineyard, the Methodists, the Anglicans. I look at all these churches and they're all soft on LGBT. They're all so soft. They're all pandering to the gay community out there. America and the West are weak and pathetic from a spiritual and moral point of view. Russia is not that way. Okay. And so when I just read to you the three main bullet points of why communism collapsed and the Cold War ended, does it not sound like America? Funding foreign terrorist groups, spending so much time and money on developing weapons or giving weapons away to other countries that there's internal crumbling of the people, the standard of living. Oh, while politicians enjoy a high standard of living. And do we or do we not have incentive to work hard and improve our skills? Because when you look at, I don't know, Amish farmers, for instance, Amish farmers, like there's that guy, I forget his name, recently in the news. He's just trying to sell his own poultry, his own eggs, his own produce from his massive organic farm, no chemicals, no poison shots to the animals, okay? No injections. And literally I forget if it was the FBI or DHS, somebody came and did a raid and they shut him down. So you tell me what kind of a system we live under. Is it communism or is it capitalism or is it some kind of something else? But I'm telling you, it ain't what you think it is. Because if you actually want to have your own ideals on the marketplace, sell, in this case, pesticide-free produce, meat that is not tainted. And if you do that on a large enough scale, where in this case, I think he was feeding 1,400 families there in the East Coast over in Massachusetts, the government will come in and shut you down. That's the system we live under. That sounds a whole lot like what I'm reading about here about the Soviet Union, where the everyday citizen lost their incentive to improve their skills and work hard because it just didn't matter. When you have a tyrannical government that will take away your hard work if it doesn't fit their agenda. Power is more important than prosperity in the eyes of a dictatorship. And my friends, I just think that's where we are at this point in history. I think it's really clear for all who have eyes to see where we are. This is why this is very important, though. The New York Times released an article, probably some of the biggest news of this week. Russia's advances on space-based nuclear weapon draw U.S. concerns. A congressman's cryptic statement about new intelligence set Washington abuzz and infuriated White House officials. We don't have to read too much of this article, The main thing is that somebody within one of the agencies of the US informed Congress and its allies in Europe about Russian advances on a new space based nuclear weapon designed to threaten America's extensive satellite network. According to current and former officials briefed on the matter, it's a satellite killing weapon. If deployed, could kill civilian communications, surveillance from space, and military command and control operations by the United States and its allies. Of course, the Kremlin caught wind of this immediately and issued their statement, which I believe is more accurate. They called this nuclear space weapon story a trick to get Biden's Ukraine aid passed. The Kremlin has blasted what it is calling a malicious fabrication by the US government of its new alleged space weapon, which set off a frenzy of media speculation this week. And so they're basically saying Dmitry Peskov said it's obvious that Washington is trying to force Congress to vote on the aid bill by hook or by crook. Now, if you guys didn't realize that the 95 billion Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan package did not pass. It was a guy named Johnson who killed it, so it didn't pass. It passed the Senate, but it did not pass the House. But of course, you know how these things work. They're just going to reintroduce it in a different way and probably get more money and funding to those countries, aforementioned countries, one way or the other. But what's important here with all of this is the narrative. Because if you look back at the Cold War and what happened in the days of the Cold War, the same kind of propaganda was being pushed. And supposedly what led to the collapse of the Soviet Union was the fact that the United States was so advanced in its military capabilities. What I'm saying is, guys, first of all, we are in a massive, it's not even a Cold War because it's already a proxy hot war with NATO in Ukraine versus Russia. We're already at war. This is bigger than the Cold War. This is this is propaganda on so many levels. It makes my head spin. There's so many angles to this. The United States is the new Soviet Union. Okay. We have a crumbling border. What did I tell you at the very beginning of this live? 60 million illegals coming through the southern border. And yet, NATO, this is from the official NATO website, nato.int. You look at their statistics of spending for the year 2023, $1.1 trillion. Okay. 1.1 trillion. And 743 trillion of that money is from the United States. Did I read about the Soviet Union over here, or did I just read about the United States? And what I'm going to submit to you today on this wonderful Shabbat is that the United States is the Soviet Union of this new Cold War, and it's destined to collapse. I think I've demonstrated that to you in many different ways. It's just a matter of what comes first. You tell me, guys. If you have any comments or questions, throw them in the chat. I'd love to see what's on your guys' mind. I know I did not do a good job checking up on the comments today. But you tell me, what's the next thing to happen? How does the House of Cards come down? But it's coming. Yeah, Hunger Games. Hunger Games, exactly. That's definitely a good comment there, Arakel Toros. Yeah, that's actually a really good documentary, although I don't recommend it, generally speaking, because you have to have a strong mind to be able to get through it. I mean, you know, get what you need out of that documentary and move on. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening. A lot of crazy stuff happening behind closed doors in this country. The prophets of Baal are going down, though. We should actually rejoice at the fact that God is going to serve them justly and repay them to their face. Yes. Okay. Let me see what else we have. Spot on, all clear. Aren't these creatures they call planets that are in disobedience? I don't know what you mean by that, Yamen Brown. But yeah, there's no planets. It's just one Earth. Just one Haaretz. All right. Well, hey guys, listen, I've enjoyed being here with you. I really don't see anything big. I don't know if you guys have anything, just let me know in the comments after the live here. I 100% agree with that, servant of El, and I can't wait till God's judgment comes upon those who rightfully deserve their share of it. As far as, yeah, something I never talk about is rapture doctrine. Uh I don't know what to tell you about that one. It doesn't exist in the Bible. The word is only found in the Latin Vulgate, rapturo. It's not found in the English. It's not found in the Greek. It's not found in the Hebrew. Rapture's fake doctrine that is very popular with people who want to escape bad times. That's not what we're called to. We're not called to be escape artists. We're called to be ambassadors no matter what the circumstances look like. Okay. So modern Christianity has a massive escape artist mentality, and they're going to be held accountable for that in a big, big way. Okay. And in fact, I will probably end there with that. Um, there's a verse that says, "We have not just been appointed to live for Christ, but also to suffer for him." It's something Paul says in one of his prison epistles. I wish I had it up, but we are called to not just live for Christ, but even suffer for him, if that is his will. So here it is. I'm going to end with this today, guys. Keep meditate on this one seriously, because that rapture doctrine is pure poison. For to you it has been granted on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake, having the same conflict which you saw in me and now here is in me. So, guys, let's quit obsessing and having these fantasies about raptures that don't exist. It has been granted for us to suffer if we have to suffer. All right, guys. Shabbat shalom again. Thank you for being here, and I will be back hopefully Monday. Again, join the Telegram because I let you guys know everything as it happens in the Telegram. It's a lot harder to do that via email or other ways. So if you want to stay up to date, there's a link down below for the Telegram. Check that out. I'm your brother Abraham, as always. Please like, drop a comment after the live is over, share the link, and help people to see that there is danger coming our way within the next 2-ish months of March and April. Things are heating up. They're heating up quickly. So cling to God, call upon the name of Yeshua, be set free, and let's do this together, guys. I'll see you very soon. God bless you.